Well, I'm so pleased that you're all here tonight. I hope that you will find some interesting things. First of all, I would like to introduce the two people whose story this really is. This is Ibrahim. Ibrahim and his brother Abdullah are from, or they live in Portland, Oregon now. They are joining us. They are our special guests. I have known these gentlemen for a little more than a year, and this is one of the best collaborations I've ever done. I'm very honored to be working with these men, and you'll hear more about their story and the fun things that have been going on with this for me for the last year and for them for the last 25, 28 years. What I'd like to do is give you a chance to say hello. Abdullah, would you like to say hello? Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, everyone. It's Abdullah. I don't know if you guys can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay,
very
good.
They're waving.
Okay.
And Ibrahim, would you like to wave at the group and say hello? You are muted, so we can't hear you.
Hi, everyone.
We have a group of about 60 people here tonight. It's really a lot of fun. These people are interested in language in many different ways. So if I say anything wrong, I hope these gentlemen will come in here and correct me. I am partly telling their story. I want to let you know that I have actually stolen, or with permission, I'm using slides that we actually used at a talk that we gave together at the Unicode conference last fall. And I've added some slides for more recent things. I'll try not to take more than 75, 80, 95 minutes. No, I'll try to get done in a reasonable amount of time, but this is a much bigger story than I can cover in the short time available. So I would encourage you to do a little work with your favorite search engine and find out more about the story. Some of you may have already read the article that was listed in the teaser for this, the Atlantic magazine article. That gives a lot of information about why this story is so interesting. And for me, at least, it keeps on getting more interesting. So anything you want to say before we get going, Abdullah or Ibrahim? Okay, well then I will get going and try to explain a little bit about this. First of all, I'd like to say Jamra, and I always pronounce this wrong, but this is the one word in Fulani or Pulaar that I can speak. It means hello. It also means thank you. And it probably means many other good things as well. And it's written in the bottom in Latin letters, which most of you will recognize. You probably don't recognize the letters in the top. They are actually read from the right to the left, and they say exactly the same thing, completely phonetically, in the topic of the talk tonight. The first part of the talk is, you'll know it's borrowed and adapted from the Unicode conference because it's pretty in green and has a nice background. My slides are not nearly as pretty. We're going to talk about Adlam, and the text at the top is Adlam. Adlam is not a language. Adlam is a writing system for a language, just like Latin letters are a writing system for English. But Adlam is short for the first four letters of the alphabet, A-D-L-M, effectively. And it is also a short thing for, or a acronym for, in their language, Pulaar, also called Fulani or Fafuldi. The language has multiple names. It means the language that will save a people from disappearing. You'll learn a little bit more about that. Let's talk a little bit about the Fulani people. This may be a group of people you may not have heard about, but they are a very large group of people, approximately 50 million, maybe more people. They live across the southern edge of the Sahara Desert called the Sahel. And they live all the way from the Atlantic coast, all the way almost to the Red Sea. That's a lot of territory. They are spread over at least 23 countries and many large cities in Africa and Europe and elsewhere. The language and the people are a little confusing to me exactly how they're said or how they're named, but Fulani is generally referring to the people and sometimes used to refer to the alphabet. The Fula, the Pul, the Fulbe, the Fulata, and so on are other names for this people. because they cover so many countries, such a wide geographic area, there are variations in the language and the culture, but they are basically people who have been in this part of Africa for many hundreds of years. They are primarily cattle people originally, and traders. So in some sense, when I first heard of this language, it was called a trading language. I actually learned about Fulani 17 years ago when my wife and I went with a small group of people to Cameroon. And one member of our group spoke Fulani and French, and he could talk to the people there. I could not at the time. But I never knew that it would be coming around again for me to contact the Fulani people again in such an exciting way. They're not as nomadic as they used to be, but they're still quite a prominent part of many countries and the cultures of many places in Africa. This gives you an idea where they are. As you can see, this is the coast of Africa, the west coast, and then it goes down, and this corner is where the Congo River comes in, and the Fulani people have occupy a lot of territory there. The countries, of course, which exist in Africa are not the countries that were established by the people who live there. They are almost all the result of colonization. And the dominant languages there are, guess what? English and French and some Portuguese, but the indigenous languages there are still there. This is also a huge amount of territory. When you look at Africa on a map, you don't realize that the Mercator projection makes Africa look smaller relative to things like Greenland and even the United States. Africa is an enormous place. So this is an enormous range of territory that they've covered. The language has a lot of varieties and dialects, but as you can see, they're all the way from approximately Ethiopia on the right, all the way to Guinea. And it was my privilege to visit Guinea about a month ago, and much of the story later is about Guinea, but we have to give you the background about why this is important. The language is known by different names as well. In Guinea and Senegal and the western part, it's called Pulaar, sometimes spelled with two A's, Fulfulde in the east, and I'm going to refer to it as Fulani or Pulaar, depending on what comes into my brain at the time. It is recognized as a national language in several countries. It is about 40% of the population of Guinea, which is a country of about 12 million people. 40% of them are Pulaar speakers. It is also recognized by some other organizations, and it has been written for a long time. It was written in the Arabic script, and that's called Ajami, a variety of the Arabic script that's been adapted to include ways of writing this language. But there wasn't really a lot of standardization. And there are lots of manuscripts, but they were written with this Arabic writing system, which is not the native writing system of these people. These people did not have a native writing system, as far as I understand. Also, the Latin alphabet has been used, primarily introduced by the colonizers, but again, not standardized, especially not standardized across these countries. So the language has been written, but many different ways. The story tonight is about how a new writing system was developed by my friends, Ibrahim and Abdullah, in the late 1980s. Their father basically gave them a challenge. It said, you know, we really need a way of writing our language that is native to us, that represents the sounds of our language, that's easy for people to understand, and that will give us some pride. Arabic and Latin didn't fit those bills because to learn those, you actually have to learn another language. How many of you would have learned easily to write in English, if you grew up in this country, if you had to learn Swedish before you could learn how to use the Latin alphabet? It would make it harder, wouldn't it? And that is the case in many countries where you need to learn somebody else's writing system to write your own language. That costs money to go to school. It takes time to learn the other language. And in a place where going to school is really tough, in the best of circumstances, that doesn't happen very much. So a lot of people are not literate in their own language. The reason Adlam has been successful primarily is because it is easy to learn. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the conference. It's a unique script that was developed by these two men. And here's where the story begins. They used the term Bindi Pulaar. Bindi means writing, and Pulaar is their language. And what we now call Adlam was called Bindi Pulaar for a long time. It was born out of two promises. The promise they made to their father that they would find a way to write their language that people could understand and improve the literacy. This was given to their father as a promise when these guys were teenagers, very young boys. That's a pretty outlandish promise. And to another man that they met at the restaurant their mother ran, and they took it upon themselves to find a way of writing. And the story goes, and there's much more detail on the web, that they actually would come home, go into the rooms and talk about ideas, work on ideas about how to write the language and come up with shapes. They'd visualize things, they'd draw shapes, and they actually came up with, after months, of an alphabet that started making sense to them. And even better than that, it made sense to other people. Now, many people invent writing systems for languages, and they almost always go to maybe 2 or 3 or 4 people, and then they don't go anywhere else. This is an exception. This is an exception because thousands of people are using this, and it's being used in many ways. But when this first started, their sister was the first one to learn the alphabet. Her name is Aissata, if I'm pronouncing that right, and she learned Bindi Pulaar, or Pulaar writing. This is their sister, and these are some of the first things that were written in this writing system. It was all handwritten at that time. These are the 2 boys about the time when they were there, and I believe this is Ibrahim, and I believe this is Abdullah. Am I saying the right thing, gentlemen? These very, very young men were busy thinking about language at this time. They were lucky. They had a great education. They had great inspiration. They worked on manuscripts for this. In the early 90s, they were starting to formalize and standardize what they were doing. One of the things about their writing system was that it was immediately phonetic. And English speakers don't really know what phonetic means because English is a mess, we know, with phonics. I took phonics when I was a kid, and I realized very quickly that that was a vague approximation to what our language is like. But Pulaar can be represented very nicely in Adlam phonetically. It's easy for people to learn, and it isn't a big alphabet. It has 28 characters. It has explicit vowels, as opposed to Arabic, which doesn't use explicit vowels. And it has things like markings over some of the vowels to indicate whether they're short sound or long sound. It has a marking over some of the consonants to indicate whether they're singled or doubled. And that's what these gentlemen worked out. So some of their first manuscripts, their first books that they were writing by hand are pretty amazing. I wish I had handwriting as clear as this. The second generation, they improved, they systematized more, and they started writing this in the form of grammars and in the form of actual instructional materials. Again, when these men were very, very young. Third generation, they were actually started writing books because people that they met were learning this. How did they learn it? First, they taught it to their sister. They taught it to some friends. They would go and teach it to other people that they met. Not in schools formally, but people were starting to learn. And as people learned and started getting excited about the way they could write their language and read it, for people who were not literate in their own language, this was exciting. This is hard to think about if you have 2nd or 3rd graders who don't want to go to school. Well, these people were excited about being able to read and write letters to each other and communicate very clearly because it's easy to standardize when it's completely phonetic. And it was their own. That's not to be understated. It was their own. It wasn't something that the conquerors had introduced. And so they were writing books, but again, all handwritten. And they found out that many, many people were getting excited about this. They also found out, Ibrahim in particular, found out that authorities don't like it when things are written that can't be read by those in government. And I don't know all the story, but perhaps he can fill us in sometime. He was actually thrown into prison, one of the worst prisons in Guinea, for 3 months for writing things that the government thought might be subversive. So writing is not only political, but sometimes it's dangerous. So they've not had rainbows and ponies for all of their work with this. Bindi Pulaar got started in the United States when Abdullah and later Ibrahim moved. And they originally talked to Unicode way back in 2004. They realized that they were going to need computing because handwriting just wasn't going to scale very well. And lots of people were wanting to use this more across the internet and so on. So in August of 2007, they contracted with a Seattle company that made 3 fonts and a keyboard. Now, because their writing system was not encoded in Unicode, there wasn't a code point for the Aleph, which is the equivalent of A. There wasn't a code point for any of these things, so they made a font hack, which is perfectly fine. The font hack is basically saying, use, in this case, the Arabic code points, the numbers for the Arabic codes, and replace them with characters that were the Adlam shapes. As long as you have the font and a keyboard and it's working on your own computer or computers that share the same thing, this works. So basically you say in a document, this is the font I'm using. It replaces the shapes with that and people can read it and exchange things. That works great. Doesn't work so great on the internet, but they were getting started here. These 3 fonts, this is one example of those fonts. They're very much like the handwritten ones and very beautiful from my point of view. Bindi Pulaar got adopted by a lot of people who were using computers. And you can see people in Africa and the United States very excited about learning how to use their own writing system in here. This man, I don't know a lot of details about him, but he also helped spread Adlam among people in Africa, went to different countries in Africa and spread this model of we can write and read in our own language across Africa. And you note that he has the same last name as these folks. The Berry name is one of the very large families in Guinea. There are 4 family names that are among the people who speak Pulaar in Guinea, and Berry is one of the largest groups. Because I was wondering, why am I meeting all these berries? Well, they aren't necessarily all the same family, but they are part of the same name. They also could start publishing books and newspapers. So when you have a font, you can start writing things. You can write things and distribute them, you can print. And so there are a few things online using this font encoding. These are things that were created, and you can see the Pulaar writing for scientific and educational purposes. And the idea is you want to teach people how to read and write. You got to talk to them about things that are important to them. And so this computing was working pretty well. But Unicode didn't seem to be working out for them. They weren't getting the right connections to get this started. Ibrahim apparently, as far as I have read and been told, took a calligraphy class because he was interested in this, met this woman, Rebecca, and they learned about making Pulaar writing, Bindi Pulaar, in a more calligraphic style. And that's what you see here. If you see, and you'll note the shapes here are somewhat different than the shapes that we showed you earlier, but they're the same letters. They're just slightly different shapes. But, and this is called the 5th generation. This isn't necessarily the only way to write it. You know that we use many fonts for writing Latin letters. People were not used to many different ways of writing this now, but this is a different style. I think it's quite beautiful. But at that conference, the calligraphy conference, Ibrahim also met a man, Randy Hassan, and another man, Stephen Rapp, and they helped them make better contact with the Unicode people. Originally, the contacts were in the mid-2000s. That didn't seem to go anywhere, and I don't know exactly why. But in the meantime, in 2012, they came up with a name, Adlam, for this rather than Bindi Pulaar. It's more catchy, and we all know that putting a name on something really helps people to understand what it is and use that term. They finally, in 2012, contacted SIL, and again, UC Berkeley, and in 2013, they got reconnected and finally were able to establish with, a connection with people who would help them get this encoded into Unicode. And this blog down here tells quite an interesting story about that. You could look for Randall M. Hassan and Adlam, and you will find this online. if you don't have time to remember that, or can't remember that whole link. 2013, they met Michael Everson, and Michael Everson has worked with many different people in getting their writing systems into Unicode, including another group I work with, the Osage Nation, which instead of 50 million people has maybe 200 people, not 200,000, 200 people who speak the Osage language in Oklahoma. Michael Everson has worked with many groups getting their language encoded, and that's a lot of work. And it took a couple of years to get the preliminary submission ready and to get the code charts ready, but they submitted it. And they finally got this note from the Unicode committee saying, congratulations, Adlam is going to be part of the Unicode standard. And in 2016, not even 2 years ago, became part of the standard. They got this note, and then they thought we were ready to go. Just briefly, I want to talk a little bit about what Adlam Unicode is. It has 34 letters, 7 modifiers and digits, but basically it's a small writing system. It has vowels, explicit vowels, consonants, and some modifiers like lengtheners. It has some punctuation. It's bicameral. They chose to make upper and lowercase. They also chose to write from the right to the left because most people there in that part of the world are familiar with Arabic, so that seemed natural for them. And they made a distinction, or a decision, which is interesting and has been done by very few writing systems. They also put their numbers right to left. So 1,234 is written from right to left. And that makes things a little tricky for the rendering systems, but it works. Significantly, Adlam is beyond the base plane in Unicode. That means it's beyond 64,000 characters, which means that it didn't work very well in a lot of systems that didn't handle beyond those basic languages that were in the base plane. Nobody cared about that until, guess what? Emoji. Emojis came along. They are beyond the base mapping plane as well. So most systems now work with emojis, and by the way, that makes Adlam work better. There are some challenges. A rendering system needs to know that the font goes right to left, not left to right. If the system doesn't understand that, like some Google products that I know of, it will start putting the characters the wrong direction because the characteristics of the script have to be understood by the system that's actually using the characters. They really like the characters joined at the bottom. Doesn't have to be, but that's a style that they liked. And new fonts need to be developed still. Combining characters have to be understood by the rendering systems, and we found a few bugs in Google and other products. And there are things like mirrorings of some punctuation marks as well. There's some text processing challenges, rendering this in applications when the font doesn't exist. Guess what you get? Tofu. Anybody know? Everybody knows what tofu is? Little white squares with no flavor. That's what tofu is. And no font, no picture. The upper and lowercase conversions are not necessarily understood by all the software now. So if you say lowercase my Adlam string, it might say, I don't know how to do that. Existing code is out there too. I'm sorry, existing text is out there. Things that have been written in this Arabic encoding. It'd be nice if we could get that into Unicode because that was written. If you throw it up on the screen without understanding the font, it will look like Arabic text, but it won't be. It will be it'll be garbage. It'll appear that way. Latin-based things also need to be encoded. And things like more advanced text processing, like spell checking and suggestions and so on, they don't exist yet. That's going to happen sometime. So after the standards release, they were all excited. And guess what? Nothing happened. This page is intentionally left blank because, as I understand it, nobody called them up and said, hey, let's get Adlam into Microsoft. Let's make sure our Apple computers can do this. Let's make sure all of Google works with Adlam. Nobody called them. Nobody cared. Or at least nobody cared enough to investigate it until, and here's where I switch to my slides, which aren't nearly as pretty, but I hope that they'll make some sense. Why didn't Adlam Unicode just happen in all the products? Well, first of all, nobody contacted them. Nobody implemented a Unicode keyboard. Nobody built a Unicode font, at least right away. Google was building one because we have a commitment to put Unicode fonts for all the characters in the Unicode standard, but that's a big job, and it hadn't happened yet. No company added the font to mobile devices. You can't show things on your Android or your iPhone or your other mobile device without a font there. And nobody was building applications. Why? Nobody knew it was important, is my guess. But then, this is the article in The Atlantic, which was a teaser to you all. If you haven't read it, read it. It's how I got familiar with these folks. It was sent to me by a former program manager of mine who now is in Australia, Sudhakar. And then I sent a note to Deborah Anderson, who was at UC Berkeley on the script encoding initiative, and said, how do I get in touch with these guys? Why did I want to do this? First of all, it was interesting. I knew about Fulani a little bit, but also they mentioned that this is just like Cherokee 200 years ago when that language was turned into a writing system by one man, and that became the salvation of the Cherokee Nation and gave them a unique way of writing their language and helped them stay together as a people. And they still use it very effectively. I said, I got to talk to these people. Done so much fun work with the Cherokee, got to talk to these people. So I called them and they answered, which is pretty amazing. And then we started doing some things together. I had never created a font before, but I knew that they didn't have a font in Unicode, and I wanted to see what these characters would look like. So I got out my font Forge, and in my terrible artistic style, I made a font that worked. It's ugly, but it works, and you can find it online if you'd like. I received the Fulfulde fonts, the fonts that were Arabic encoded from them, and started writing something that would decode them. And this is what we built together. I worked on this with Ibrahim and Abdullah, and we use this as a testing platform. It's a little Google's App Engine, and it is basically testing. It has several pages. One page is with a keyboard. I built a keyboard that's based upon some of Google's input tool technology. It's a little JavaScript keyboard that produces characters. There are other things in here, but basically it was a way that we could try things out without having to, without me showing them Google specific stuff and without me having to go up and visit them. We got a lot of work done. One can use this. You can log in there and try it. You can see the 3 different fonts that they came up with. These are the Arabic encoded ones. We use it for testing Unicode fonts as they're developed, and converting the Latin and the Arabic encodings into Unicode is working pretty well now. It's a place to start. And we did a lot of debugging and trying to figure out what would we want to support this language. And I didn't really know where we were going to go, but I knew that this was important. And as I learned more, I realized this is really important to a lot of people. I decided that the next thing to do would not be for me to explain to everybody at Google why this is important. I invited them to come down here, and they actually drove with a car full of their friends and other Pulaar speakers down here. People from New York City and Boston came for their talk at Google. I didn't know they were all going to come, but for them to travel that far to support the brothers at a talk at Google was pretty fantastic. And this talk is available. You know how to use YouTube, I think. And look up YouTube, Talks at Google Adlam, and you will find this talk. And it's a terrific talk. The important thing was not the talk, although it's really fascinating. It's a nicer version of what I've just told you. The important thing is that they made the contacts and the people in Google Fonts and keyboards, and some other people said, this is a big deal. This is important. And they said, we're going to start working on that. The key result is that Google engineers saw that this is something worth doing and got to work on it. Then I had this wild idea that we ought to spread the word a little bit more. And so I invited them to collaborate with me on a paper at the Unicode Conference, which is in October here down in Santa Clara. And we wrote this paper called What Happens After Unicode Adds the Script? And the answer, of course, is nothing, unless somebody cares. But we talked about that. These folks met people from the other tech companies in the area and around here, and they are starting to get connections that will pay off in terms of better support for this. I also wrote a script, Python script, that takes old documents, basically Microsoft Word documents, parses them with using some Python routines that will parse the structure of a Microsoft document. And wherever I find the old font, I replace it with the new font, which is a Unicode font, and I convert the characters into the Unicode characters. And so we've converted quite a number of docx files, which saves a whole lot of hours and means there's no retyping done. They invited me to come to Africa after this. I'd invited them enough, so they said, time for Craig to do something, Craig to travel. And so they invited me to come to a conference in Africa. I did not understand a lot about this conference, but I got on a plane January 2nd and flew to Guinea. You might say, where's Guinea? Well, we'll get into that a little bit more. I really didn't know much about it. I didn't know how big it was. I didn't really understand a lot about the conference. But I was met at the airport by about 20 people, and they all wanted to take my picture. That's never happened to me before. I felt a little bit like a rock star. And it was wonderful, but I really felt like somebody was kind of excited about their language and about what we were doing with the language. And that was just the beginning of it. We had an introductory meeting in the capital, Conakry. Conakry is a big, sprawling, crazy African city. We had a meeting there with about 60 people. Really important to understand, when you meet people in Guinea, you don't just say, hello, how are you? You have a lot of personal contact, hands, everybody shakes hands. People hug each other, even if they don't know each other. And you meet the people in the community. You meet the community leaders. You meet the imam. You meet the people in this organization. Ibrahim and Abdullah built an organization which is called Windan Jangan, which means writing, reading in Pulaar. And I met all the people who'd started this organization and the leaders and the former leaders of this in a house in Conakry. And then we began the trip to the other cities where the conference was actually held. But just a little bit about Guinea. It's a country in West Africa. That's where it is. It's not a big country by African standards. It has as its official language French, because even though there are some indigenous languages, it is primarily in French that most of the business is done. I just so happen to have been taking a French class for the last year and a half, and so I could really speak some terrible French to them, but could almost understand things, and it was really quite amazing. And that was my trip to Africa. It took me 30 hours to get to Conakry, stopping briefly at Mauritania, which was a little dicey from my point of view. Conakry is the capital, which I circled here. We went to this city called Mamou, which is in the center, which was where the main conference was for 3 days. We went up to Labé for 2 more days. And these were the roads and places that I visited in Guinea. It was not a tourist trip. And I've got this other place circled here, Zokere, which is the home of Abdullah and Ibrahim, way down in the other corner of Guinea. Just to let you know, to go from here to here, which is about 120 kilometers, takes 4 to 5 hours. The road system is not as good as the roads here. Although coming here, you might have noticed that it would take you that long to go on Google traffic or local traffic. So for people to come from this city way up to Mamou is quite a hike. And many people did that for this conference. Now, the meet and greet in Conakry was pretty amazing. This is me. Oh, I have to change, excuse me. Perfect reaction. So this is not something that I designed. In fact, it may not be something that I can figure out how to put on. Again, I needed help. But when I got to the meet and greet, I was given this, and I was given this. As you'll see, all the men wear these hats. This one is embroidered special. It says Google on the top. It says Google on the bottom. And guess what? Latin characters, Adlam characters. It's pretty cool. I had no idea any of this was going to happen. And I'm hoping I've got this on fairly reasonably. They gave this to me, and this is meeting with the former head of the Windin organization. Again, one of the Berry family or Berry group. This is a minister of parliament of the country of Guinea. This is another man who was with the organization. I was meeting important people, and I was in my blue jeans and t-shirts and not quite sure. Here's my hat, and then other side up. It works both ways. It's pretty cool. We went to Mamou. Mamou is a city of about 90,000 people. This was the banner at the community center there in Mamou. Of course, before we went to the community center, we had to meet with the head man of the head man. He's sort of the community leader. We had to go to his house. Everyone gets introduced at these things. Everyone gets introduced, and there were people from many countries there. And so it would take 15 minutes in the United States for everybody to meet, be introduced, and so on. This takes 2 hours. The social system is fantastic, though. People get to know each other and are formal and kind, but also really get to know each other. And so I felt very honored, and I was treated as an honored guest. And all I'd done is a few bits and bytes. Then we went to the government center, where again, we met people, we were introduced, and the governor of this district of Guinea, one of the 7 or 8 districts of Guinea, was there, and another leader was there. So important people from the government were also there. They don't throw people in jail for Adlam anymore. And this says, I think it says, "We hope that you feel welcome here," down in French. That part I can read. The rest of it is in Adlam. I realized that this is a big deal. I had no idea how many people were going to be there. That's how many people were there. I estimate at this one place, there were about 800 people in this room and more who couldn't get in. It was for young people, old people. These are schoolgirls, and you can see they have Adlam t-shirts and Adlam sashes. You can see that there is a man outside selling books and newspapers and educational materials in here. You can see that this is a slide that was written in Adlam and purposely showing the tofu that doesn't happen, or that doesn't work when you don't have the right font, by Abdullahi. This was his talk. And other people, particularly women from many countries who were there. They would sing songs about their alphabet. Now we sing songs about A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and I won't go further because I'll embarrass myself even more. They were singing multiple verse songs, call response songs. Schoolgirls and schoolboys were singing songs about their writing system. People don't get that excited about reading and writing here, but they were, because this is an opportunity for them to really grow and learn and see their future in a way that they couldn't before they knew how to do this. All I could understand in these songs was Bindi Pulaar. And later they wrote a song that had Google in it. So it was Google something, 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 Bindi Pulaar. About 20 verses of this. But you can see that they were excited about this. To give you an idea how big a deal this was, this is that part of Africa. These are the countries in West Africa where I first met people: Mauritania, Senegal, Guinea-Bissau, and Guinea. Guinea-Bissau and Guinea are only separated because the Portuguese took one part and the French took another part. But these are the other countries that were represented there. Every country in West Africa had representatives there. And also there was someone from Angola, person from Kuwait, people from Europe, and of course, they have representatives from other parts of the world. They say that this is becoming a new lingua franca for West Africa, and I can believe it. So here's me speaking to them. And I asked them at the very beginning, I spoke in English because my French would be really difficult for anybody to understand. And I asked them, oh, and Ibrahim was my translator. And so I got to talk twice as long. It was a lot of fun. I asked them at one point for everyone to hold up their cell phones, or how many had cell phones? And they raised their hands when the translation went through. And everybody raised their cell phones. And you can see all these cell phones, and many of them are recording this whole darn thing. and hundreds and hundreds of cell phones up there. Everyone has a cell phone there. The phone network there is better than it is here. T-Mobile does not work there, but Orange network works great. And I gave my talk, and it was quite amazing. Let me tell you a little bit about some of the things that Google has done, which I told them about here. Google did build a font. Noto Sans Adlam is there. It's available now. Anybody can use this on their own computers. We also had some tech releases in December. We got Android 8.0. It includes the Noto font for Adlam. All of a sudden, no more tofu, which is kind of nice. And our Gboard team added the keyboard to type this. That was really exciting. I told them this. They were kind of excited about this. Abdullaya is busy typing in Adlam on his phone here and telling people about that. Also Chromebooks. Chromebooks now have a keyboard built in Google Input Tools, and that I built myself. That was a lot of fun. And we also have the font. So anybody's Chromebook now, an updated Chromebook, can support Bindi Pulaar or Adlam directly. Here's a little positive feedback, and I don't know if you can, whoops, I'm sorry. Let's see if we can do this. If you can hear that, they're shouting Google. It's actually a little scary to have 800 people so excited about what you've done that they're shouting your company's name. And this was not just one time. I only recorded 12 seconds of this. This went on. And sometimes people get up to the microphone when I'd come in the room and say, Google, Google. It was amazing. Everyone wanted to take pictures with me. I actually had one of Abdullah and Ibrahim's friends actually chose to be my bodyguard and would get me out of the room and make sure that people would say or understand that, no, that's enough pictures. I actually got tired of smiling. And I understand a little bit about why rock stars and movie stars have a hard time with it. This is the closest I'll ever get. But it was very exciting. They liked it.
Yes.
So I also noticed in the community, Mamou has this big sign saying, welcome to Mamou in French and in Bindi Pulaar or Adlam as well. It's starting to be used not just in people's own communications and writing. This is a sign for a dispensary of natural products in the town of Labé. Here is the dispensary for the natural products. I had to take a picture with the little kids. They were amazing. This is Ibrahim and Sansi, my bodyguard. And this is the product. I'm showing you the Adlam side of it because the people can read this, whereas the French, they might not be able to, but they can read this and understand what it says because they can sound it out, even if they're not experts at reading and writing. This is a chart, which you may have seen before, but note that everything's labeled properly in Adlam. It's a little hard to see, but the top and bottom are tofu because that particular product or that particular rendering system didn't understand the font completely well. Just because they had a font, and this was one of the old Arabic fonts, doesn't mean it works everywhere perfectly. Hello, what are we waiting for here? Oh, books. And products. This was a jar of mangoes, and even sports teams are starting to use this on their things. So this is real. Many people make up writing systems. Very few of them are actually adopted by hundreds and thousands and perhaps millions of people. So, the Adlam Conference was pretty amazing. It was a big deal. And I said that to them and myself many times that week. I felt incredibly well taken care of. I felt like I've lost my microphone. I felt that, that I was doing something really important here. And my wife will tell you, and my kids would too, that I'm mostly in my head. I'm bits and bytes, and how do you figure out do something mathematically? How do you explain it in chemistry and so on? But at this conference, Adlam and the language went from being up here, bits and bytes, to here, my heart. And that is the biggest thing for me personally about this conference. It was fantastic because I met so many people who are so excited about improving the lot of their people, their families, their neighbors, their countries by improving literacy and giving people more than they had before. And these two brothers started this all. It's pretty amazing. So this language is being widely used. Adlam is very effective in learning to teach this language. One of the men from Mauritania who has been teaching how to read and write in this language for many years said, in 2 years, he can't teach as much as he can in 2 months with Adlam. If he's using the Latin or Arabic script, it's at least 10 times slower to teach in those, but Adlam, people learn. And he was actually giving classes on how to teach in Adlam. Their biggest need right now is teachers who can go to the villages and towns and teach people how to use this writing system. It's gaining momentum among these people. Adlam is getting international reach, and that's pretty exciting. And it's going to be on those cell phones. Android 8 is not very many places yet. But when they start getting Android with that font in there, then they're going to be texting to each other. Before, people would text to each other. You know how they do it? They'd handwrite it in Adlam, take a picture of it, and text the picture, which is the only way they had to do it. Now they can start doing it here. Even though the font isn't the only font that they'd like to have. They'd like to have more variety in fonts. The calligraphic font is nice, but they'd prefer something else. But this is going to start changing people's lives in a major way. And really interesting, and Google internationalization people, please note, people are also starting to use Adlam to write other languages like Hausa. And people are actually starting to think about writing it in Swahili. Why? Because the sounds match those languages pretty well, a whole lot better than the other writing systems do. And you don't have to go to school to learn it. That's pretty amazing to me. So just a little bit more back to their slides, just to give you an idea of some of the current state of Adlam. People are learning it. They're reading and writing newspapers. They're teaching children and adults how to read and write. It's in Cameroon, and you can see just a few people are excited about this. After the conference, what happened? Well, a couple of weeks ago, I said, has anything happened since I got back? I got back on the 11th. Coming back was 32 hours. At least it was Air France and the food was good. But I did some Google searching with the help of my friends and looked up ADLAM, written in the Adlam characters. And these are things that pop up. First of all, lots of things that include that. It may be hard to see, but you can actually see the Adlam script in some of these YouTube videos and other things. YouTube is a great place for this. This one demonstrates how Adlam and Latin script and Arabic script and French down here are all being mixed together with these people, but they're using all of these things and they're starting to use Adlam now. So I'm hoping that we'll see a lot of growth in this. People will start texting each other a whole lot easier. People will start getting better in their communication and reading and writing skills. So this is just a little follow-up, and I had to show my hat again. My hat was actually on a YouTube post. I'm sorry, that social networking post that you might know a little bit about. We're not done. This is something that Abdullah sent me here, and basically it's a picture with Adlam down here, but the person is saying, basically in French, I can't see it because it's all squares. It's all tofu. He wrote that in French. And the answer is many people aren't seeing this yet. So what's got to happen? Well, there's several things. I think there are 3 communities that should pay attention here. First, the users. They should learn how to use Adlam and type it and read it. And they are. They're going to do that automatically. But generate content. Use this on social media. Use this to build websites. Use it, because there's some companies that might pay attention when there's more content out there. I work for one of them. And we can find this stuff. We don't have to do anything within Google to start finding this, because I didn't change Google search. It just works. May not be perfect, may not do all the subtleties that it works with languages that we know more about, but it's starting to work. Adlam people who are a little more technical and are pushing this really need to do things like create more fonts and get them to be installed everywhere. And that includes mobile devices, and help users install it on their own computers so that people can start using it on any device, because most people aren't technical. Most people don't know how to install a font, but people are busy building videos on how to do these things. And they're doing it in Pulaar, which I can't understand. It's really interesting to go to a conference and about the only thing you understand is your own talk. I've done this a couple of times. I did it in Denmark years ago, and I did it in Africa last month. But it's really interesting to sit back and watch how the people are reacting to what's going on there. People from 24 countries talking about how Adlam is changing their lives. Tech companies, we should pay attention. We should build more keyboards and fonts. We're not done yet. We should fix Google Docs and other applications so that we understand that this is a right to left language. And we should fix things such that fonts which aren't well known yet still can be used to render text. We should make web fonts available and help people understand how to build their pages so people can read them, even if they're not installing them on their own devices. And there should be a lot more internet support on all the products. Why is this important? Is it important to Google Ads and other money-making things? No. We're not going to make a nickel out of this for a while. But what is important? Google's making friends. And anybody who supports this language is going to be very happy when they can, this writing system. They're going to be very happy when they can do this on their own and communicate more clearly. So I think it's in the interest of the tech companies to do something that's the right thing rather than the right thing for the wallet. So there's a lot to be done. So this is a picture that was taken on the way back from Mamou. This is a family grouping of Abraham and Abdullah's friends and family, and some of the other people who were speakers. The man in blue, for example, is the Mauritanian teacher who was saying how much easier it is to read and write. This man here is their uncle. He spent 30-some years at the United Nations in New York. So this is no slouch of a family in terms of accomplishment. And people from other countries, Ibrahim and Abdullah is up here somewhere. Anyway, this is one of my final impressions from that part of the world. It's pretty amazing. So I'm going to say to you, Anjamra, which means thank you. And that's it. And there are more links which will appear on the video, which you can learn more about. I didn't talk nearly as long as I expected. Ibrahim, Abdullah, do you have anything to say? Correct all the lies I told.
No, this is great. This is way better than what we did even at the Google Talk. This is very good.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yes.
I'm glad to hear that. Well, they're all going to go look at your YouTube video now. So now you know something. Now you know some people that you will not run into every day. People who are really changing people's lives in a very big way. So when you talk about important people you've met, they're not just the captains of industry. There are people who put their lives, their finances, and their hearts into a tremendous project. And these two men are some of them. I feel very honored to have met them. Ibrahim, do you have anything to say?
I'm gonna say thank you so much. This is great.
So just to let you know, these people all work in languages, various things, work in translation, work in localization. They work for tech companies and other companies that use languages on the internet. And now maybe they'll know a little bit more about Adlam and your language. Maybe we'll see more content coming from them at some point. Maybe they'll need to hire Adlam translators for Fulani. Who knows? I also want to point out on this last slide, see those little tofus down at the bottom? Google Slides does not understand the font yet. So we've got a little work to do there too. Any questions? Questions for me or for my friends and colleagues? And Joe has the mic. If you have questions, please.
The mic right here.
I couldn't have explained everything. Kat.
Okay.
I have so many questions, but let me just ask one.
We can ask some of them tomorrow.
Yeah, I'll ask some of them tomorrow. How come Raven Vadell wrote this article for The Atlantic? How did this come about?
Maybe Abdullah can answer that better than I. Abdullah, can you say how the Atlantic article came about?
Yes, thank you. And so the article, we were contacted by the guy who wrote the article because he wrote the blog post written by Randy, the one that Craig was talking about. So he wrote the blog post. It's a long article in 3 parts. So he wrote that article about Adlam, about all the process and the stuff that he did with my brother, and that's how the guy from the Atlantic found out about Adlam, and then he called us, and then he wanted to do an interview and write an article.
And his name is Raven? He can't hear you. Is his name Raven? Is that what his name is?
Let me see. I can't remember.
I thought that was his name, actually.
Randall Hassan is the one who wrote that article, and this is a blog listing for him.
Oh, I see.
And but look up how alphabet changes things without, and you'll find this blog, 3 parts, that explains the connection between that calligraphy course that Ibrahim was taking and the article in the Atlantic, which probably got a little bit of attention, at least from someone I know. Does that make sense?
Yes, that article actually got a lot of attention because through that article, that's how we got in touch with you. And also from that article, we did another interview with BBC, and we were contacted by the CBS News organization and another German newspaper that we did an interview for. So yeah, that article from the Atlantic had a great reach, and it allowed us to talk more about Adlam across multiple, places.
So Ibrahim, when you signed up to take that calligraphy class, you didn't know what would happen.
Yeah, really, I didn't know what would happen. But my intention was to learn calligraphy and improve Adlam.
Yes. So I think one of the lessons out of this, and I don't deny that I talk a lot, but connections are really important.
Yes.
Never hesitate to talk to somebody about something you're excited about, because who knows where it can lead. I met the Cherokee Nation person because I said I'm working in language, and I asked about his name, Black Fox, and he said that's my tribal name. And that I can trace through to connecting with these guys because I saw Cherokee in an article in the Atlantic. And the threads of our lives came together by these casual conversations, accidental meetings, talking about what it is they love. In the blog article, which I just read again today, it talks about how there was a book on the table at the calligraphy class, tell me if I'm right, that said African writing. Is that right?
Yeah, the African alphabet.
Yes, African alphabets and how you can do calligraphy with them. And he said, what did you say?
Oh, I look at the book and I just told him those alphabets are not the only African alphabet. And he told me to sit down and we started talking. And in the blog, it says that he asked 3 times, how did you get this writing system? Did you adapt it from somebody else? Did you just convert it from something existing? And Ibrahim had to say 3 times, no, my brother and I invented this, and it's real. And finally, it was believed. So sometimes the first time you say something isn't enough. I had a question for you, gentlemen. How did you know that this was a big deal? You tell a story about going to a market. Oh, yeah. Since I was back home, when I started going to the University of Conakry, the writing system had started spreading so much that I have just a little time even for my classes. So once I moved to Senegal, I went to the markets. I saw ladies in the oil markets reading books I have written in Guinea long time ago, and I asked them, what is this? They said, this is the Fulani languages. And I said, who taught you this? They said, a lady is from Guinea who is our boss. She's sending the palm oil here.
she sent us the books and she taught us. And they told me, if you want to learn, we're ready to teach you. I said, yes, I want to learn this. And they said, you should come tomorrow. You're going to start learning this one with us. We're ready to give you a book for free. So when I come back at my place, I said, we really have to work on this because it's helping people a lot, because they saw me, since they know how to read and write with the Adlam script. Now they're keeping a book of their business. If someone take a oil, they write their name, the price. It completely changed their life, how they manage their business, how they deal with people. And they were so happy, and it gave me a lot of energy after that.
I think isn't that pretty amazing? It's like you build an app and you go out and somebody says, hey, this great app, you ought to adopt it. And you could say, well, I invented that. That's exactly what this situation was. And the other thing that's wonderful about that story is that this language or this writing system isn't for writing necessarily novels and big long articles. It's for writing grocery lists. It's for writing what the prices of your products are. It's for day-to-day stuff, which is really hard if you can't write your own language. And all of a sudden, they made this simpler for many, many people. That's got to be a good thing. Other question? Way at the back?
Way in the back. Hang on. He can't hear you until I get there. That's my magic.
And I'm going to just take a second and show you this. This is a YouTube video I found yesterday. This is actually Adlam being used for the Hausa language, I am told, which I cannot understand either. Go ahead, please.
Thank you for this amazing talk. I have a question for the two brothers. I was curious about how you decided when you were creating the alphabet. How did you decide on the shape of the letters? What about the artistic process? I mean, how did you decide on the shape of the letters? Are the consonants different from the vowels? What can you say about the shape of the letters and how you decided?
Okay. Babi mijabo ka jabur. Okay, so basically, so what we would do, as Craig mentioned during his presentation when he showed that picture, is after school, we would go in our room and then we lock the door. We just sit there and then start drawing randomly and then close our eyes, draw randomly. And once we open our eyes, then we will look at what we drew randomly and see if there is something there that looks like a letter that we could use. And then we'll just extract that from the lines that we drew. And or sometimes when I'm in class and I'll just sit there and think of a letter that's or a sound that's missing, and then I'll just imagine how we should look like. And when I go home, we'll just draw. I try to draw from that imagination. But the decision that we made originally was to always make the vowels shorter than the consonants. And that's the only, in terms of style, that was the only decision that we made in terms of how it should look like. And then, of course, we decided, like Craig mentioned, that the alphabet should go from right to left because we are more familiar with writing that way. Because at that time, and even till today, a lot of people get educated in reading, the Arabic because the majority of the population is Muslim, 90% and above. So most people read when they're little kids, they read, a few verses so that they know how to pray. So from that, they can read or they can write Arabic. But most people don't go to French schools because there aren't enough schools for all the kids that are there. And, the population is very young and government has very limited resources, and they usually don't build enough schools to accommodate all the children that need to go to school. So that's why you see there are a lot of people there, more than half of the population that did not get a chance to go to a formal school, French school. So that's why the alphabet coming, since they already know the language, they can easily just adapt the alphabet, and there's no need to learn a new language. So right after they learn the alphabet, they can just go about using it to do their business. I
Ibrahim,
hope that answers the question, but I don't know if my brother has something to add.
did that help?
Yep.
Ibrahim, did you have anything to say?
Oh, okay.
This is okay. I don't have something to add to that.
Okay, very good. Great question. Thank you. Up here?
Hi. So first of all, congratulations for your success. A pretty amazing story. Love it. So my question is basically a follow-up question to your answer. So since the Latin and Arabic writing system were already used by the peoples, could you explain why you decided to change the left to right of numbers to right to left? Because both existing writing systems use left to right for numbers.
So why did you decide to make the digits go right to left as well as the which is different than Arabic?
Yes.
Basically,
what we did is that we write in the numbers the way we pronounce them, because for us, when you say since the alphabet is going from right to left, and when you are reading a number, you're reading that number also from right to left. So we decided the alphabet should go like that, because what we thought also at the beginning that the reason why Arabic numbers go from left to right, even though the writing system goes from right to left, is because they read the numbers from left to right instead of reading them from right to left as they do for the writing system. But we did experiment with writing the numbers from left to right. And the first keyboard that we made, that was made based on the Arabic keyboard, the numbers are actually from left to right, but it's actually the users also of the language that, because we get input from them also about how they're using the alphabet and what they think works better for them, because since they're the user, so they say to us that the numbers going from right to left will be better for them than if they are going from left to right, because that would be too confusing.
when you think about that's the way it works in English, you say 1,234.
Yes.
We read that left to right. But this writing system that they've chosen, the way they've chosen to do numbers, are only done in a couple of languages. Most languages, Hebrew and Arabic, and most other languages that are written right to left, do the digits the way we do it in the Western languages. Another question back here?
Hello. I'm curious to know the sounds of the alphabets, and if that's a lot of work. I'd like to know if there are any exotic sounds like in Arabic, like ayn, ha, or in other languages like ha or rin. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good question.
Yes, there are actually, that's one of the
Java.
So those are one of the things that actually motivated us in creating the alphabet, because people were exchanging letters back in the days using the Arabic script, but we do have sounds that are specific to the Fulani language that cannot be reproduced using the Arabic characters. So one of those sounds is the ya, the ba, the na, the da, and then we have the mba, the nja, ninga, and all of those sounds cannot be reproduced easily with the Arabic sounds. So we have those, specific to Fulani, to the Fulani language.
If you are interested, there is an Adlam app which has the alphabet, and I don't know if if you can hear it, but did that make sense?
Yes.
And so on. You can actually Aleph, Dal, Lam, Mim.
So that's actually interesting. The app. So that app was built, like I just mentioned again. So we get input from people. So first, when we came up with the alphabet, the writing system, we were teaching it in a way that people were already used to. Since people were already used to learning the Arabic, so we thought it would be easier for them to just learn the new shapes, but not change the way they pronounce the letters. Because actually, the Fulani people, when they took the Arabic writing system, they adapted to our language. So we do say the Aleph like they say in Arabic, but for example, for the sin, we say sinye. And then for the sa, we say saredu. Those are things, names adapted to our language for the Arabic alphabet. So when we created the alphabet, we also tried to use those same names for the existing names for the new letters. But later on, also people told us that it would be easier for them to just pronounce it Adalama Basa. So that's why the way people read it now is a little different from the way the app is pronouncing it, because the app is reading the alphabet the old way. I don't know if that makes sense.
As you might have gathered, things have evolved over the last 20 some years as they, from the starting point to what they have now. They decided to add upper and lower case. I'm not altogether sure that's a good idea, but they did that. But nobody who types Adlam now is using upper lower case, because unless they're using the new keyboards, it's not possible. That will require people to get used to those shapes as well. So it's going to be interesting to see the way people use this language. Maybe they will use it only in uppercase for a long time. What's your experience so far?
People who already bought the cell phones, they're using both.
Yes.
Okay, good. But Google doesn't know how to do upper and lower casing of things yet. We'll try to get that into JavaScript sometime soon. Another question.
So now that you have Adlam in Google and Adlam in a few devices, are you working with the Wikimedia Foundation to get into Wikipedia, Wiktionary, and so on? I think it'd be an awesome tool.
Yes, when we were at the Unicode conference, we met a lady there from the Wikipedia, and they've told us that if we wanted to, if we had the time, that's something that we can work on. But right now, what we are doing, since we have limited time and we don't have a lot of people, so basically, like Craig mentioned, so this is like a side, job that we are doing. So we try to focus on what's the most useful, what will have an impact on people's, an immediate impact on people's lives, like having the Adlam available on cell phones and computers will have a more immediate impact than Wikipedia. Of course, Wikipedia, we are thinking about it, but we will just want to make sure that we have all the tools available, and then we'll start working on that as well.
I think it's important to note that Wikipedia has a short section on Adlam in the midst of their quite extensive description of the Fulani, Pulaar language. So they talk briefly about Adlam. Nobody's written that piece yet, but there ought to be a piece. But let me just show you briefly something that will give you more information. This is the Windenjangan website, and that's pretty easy to find. WINDENJANGEN.org is their organization for promoting this, and you can learn much more about it in their own words on this site. And I would be remiss if I don't mention also what they've said to me. One of the things they really want to do is get some high quality Unicode fonts. We have one which is in that calligraphic style, Noto Sans. It doesn't work everywhere, doesn't work with all of the applications, and it's only one style. They'd like to get more fonts, but you know what? Fonts cost lots of money. And so that's one of the activities they've told me that they're working on. And if you go to Windenjangan and you have a nickel to spare, they do have a PayPal button. But if you're inspired, that wouldn't be a terrible thing. And I've probably broken some rule there, but I made my contribution earlier today. So you can learn much more about this online. Wikipedia doesn't have a lot of information yet. Is that fair to say? Did I say anything wrong?
Yeah, that is true, yes.
Another question?
Yep. From some of the pictures, it seems like Adlam is having quite a bit of an impact on women's life and their education. So would you confirm that? And can you tell us something about that?
Yes, I think the Adlam, women are more excited about Adlam than anyone else, because most of the time in our society, most of the time, if the family doesn't have enough money, they send only school,
The boys.
to school. So most of the time, women don't go to school. With Adlam, a lot of, even if you see, even in the United States, a lot of women who learn the Adlam script, they're teaching their kid a lot. And they're asking book for book every day. There is some of the cities, small cities in Guinea, all the women in those cities know how to read and write in Adlam. I think we have more women who know to read and write Adlam than men, actually, in our society.
And one of the important things also that I wanted to mention is that, you know, the conference that Craig went to, that was the third one. The first one started 3 years ago in a small city called Timbi Madina, and the reason why it actually started there is because there are a lot of women co-ops there, and they work in growing potatoes, and all of those women are the ones who learned Adlam, and it's because of them we actually started the conference. They started. They are the reason why the conference first started there, and then since it was a successful conference, then people decided every year that they should have it. Then they have it the following year in Labé, and this year they had it in Mamou. So Adlam has, it's being used a lot by women, and it impacts them a lot. And as my brother said, they have a higher illiteracy rate than men because more boys go to school than girls. So like I said earlier, so if you already speak the language, all you need is the alphabet. So it's easier for you to do everything that you need in the Fulani language using Adlam than trying to learn French with the Latin alphabet.
I have something that's related to that. I met a lot of really amazing women there, and I could almost speak to some of them in French. But there was a group from Nigeria, a big delegation from Nigeria. And when you think Nigeria is the distance from here to Chicago, from where we were, and the roads are, let's say, not super highways, many of them came by car from Nigeria, including women. And the women are the ones who are in charge of the cattle business, for example, in the northern towns of Nigeria. I wouldn't mess with those ladies. They are tough, smart, and very determined people. To even attempt to come to the conference shows a tremendous amount of enthusiasm and determination. And next year, the Adlam Conference is planned to be in a town of, Kano, Nigeria. Is that correct?
Oh, it's going to be in Nigeria, but they didn't decide the town yet because different cities are competing to have the conference.
So, but the Nigerians were the ones I could talk to more easily because they mostly speak English as their colonial language. So I actually talked to them more than, or at least I didn't embarrass myself as much with them as I did in my terrible French. But it's exciting. It really is quite amazing and exciting how people are not only going to this conference like we'd go to a conference in San Jose, they are going thousands of miles to attend these conferences and spending real resources to do this. This is a huge literacy project. It's quite amazing. And it's come from two teenage boys sitting in their rooms. How many of you have teenage boys? I did, and they weren't doing that. We had to get the video games out of their hands. They weren't quite as productive as Ibrahim and Abdullah. So, are there more questions? Please. Any more questions? Yes, one back here.
Hi, thank you. I'd like to ask, how did the government come to accept Adlam? Thank you.
Did you heard the question?
Yeah, I heard the question. I think right now they don't have a choice. Even the conference in Mamou, they didn't want the conference to take place because 3 days before the conference, they said there will not be a conference in their city. But all the Fulani leaders and even some of the people from Nigeria, they have high position in the government in Nigeria. all those people was coming to Guinea, and in West Africa, Nigeria is the most powerful country. So it was not, they didn't want the conference, but they couldn't do anything because all the Fulani have decided this conference going to take place in Mamou. So,
and also what I was going to add also is because so the government is already used to, they know about Adlam or now, they know it's spread because prior to this conference, we also had there was Harvard with UNESCO organized a conference in Guinea in April, and I was there for that conference, and that conference was also sponsored by the government partially because the guy who was in charge of that was a representative of the government. So, and they know about Adlam, and like my brother said, you know, what the majority of the people is following is what the government is. The government cannot stand in front of that because otherwise they will have to deal with the people. So even if they don't want it because there are maybe they don't want it, they didn't want it to happen, but more for some political reasons and for competing interests than for them now wanting Adlam to actually succeed. So it's more like because anytime they see a large gathering of people, maybe they will think of it as a threat to their power. So they would want Adlam to grow, but not to be a threat to their rule. Basically, that's all it is. They don't want anything that would challenge basically their power because the governments are still in shaky situations in Guinea.
So, as we all know from politics all around the world, language is powerful and it's dangerous when it's misused, and it confronts those people who might not want things known and said. So there's a lot more than just nice words. There's a lot more than grocery lists involved in things like this. And I just have to put this back up here because these are the ladies who so impressed me. And just a few of the people from multiple countries who come there. I think it's also worth asking or mentioning that not everybody who speaks Fulani Pulaar thinks that Adlam is a good idea. There are people who are writing articles saying, why do this? We already have a way of writing this already. You're inventing something new. All the computers will have to be updated. And that is an issue. And my own colleagues have asked, why did they do this? But I think you know a little bit more about why it was done. And hey, it kind of looks like it's successful and is going to be successful in the future. So I think it's pretty amazing. Another question.
First of all, let me say that this whole story is really inspiring, and it's inspiring to see how the work of two teenagers is helping to a whole bunch of people to be empowered, and how you are helping them to find their own voices. And thank you. But do you have any information about the literacy rate and how, if any government is studying the adoption of Adlam as an official writing system?
Yeah, like in Guinea is recognized now like one of the writing system in Guinea. Even the newspaper we publishing every month right now, the government give a what they call authorization.
Permission.
What? They give the paper to the people to tell basically you're allowed to publish this newspaper.
Yes.
So also I was told like in the northern in Nigeria, they're going to start learning in primary and high school. Schools Adlam using full day using the Adlam script. They're working on that.
And in Cameroon also.
Yeah, in Cameroon. But beside that, most of the, right now, like in Guinea, we have more private school than public school. But, and all the, I can say most of the private school owned by Fulani, Adlam they're teaching Adlam, because if you want to have more students in your school right now, you have to use Adlam in some of those schools.
And also what I wanted to add, because the government is also aware of the high illiteracy rate, and so they have programs or projects usually in Guinea being implemented to educate adults for adult education programs, and those are usually done in the local languages, because once somebody is an adult, now they know that person can now go through the French school system. So they've recognized 3 ways of writing and teaching the adults. And we have a ministry there called the Ministry of Alphabetization. And Adlam is recognized now as, in Guinea, as the way to teach people in Pulaar. The way is recognized as the alphabet to use for teaching the Fulani language, the Pulaar language.
Other questions?
You mentioned that technology was slowing down full adoption of Adlam, if I understood correctly, in terms of how will you handle all those slow computer upgrades? My phone is not working with, my phone doesn't have a keyboard, my phone doesn't have the font installed. How do you push that into the community, or how do you convince people, okay, this may be in your best interest, but I could imagine there is also a high cost attached to it.
Maybe I'll start with this, and the brothers can fill in. I'm not very strategic in my thinking, but inviting these guys to the Unicode conference was really important. So they talked to the keyboard guy from Microsoft and the font people and other people in those companies, and made them aware of how important this is. Also, this thing only works, or Adlam font is only available on Android 8. How many Android 8s are there out there? Anybody got Android 8 besides me? A few people here. Last time I checked, it was less than 1% of the Android phones out there had Android 8. So it's going to take a while. And it's probably going to remain that way for a while. But there are several big tech companies who are selling phones. Everyone has a phone there like this, and most of them are Android phones. And Samsung could decide to put that font on there. If Samsung decides to put font on there on Android 6 or Android 5 or Android 7, and Techno is another company, if that company would decide to put the font on there, it's a font of about 40,000 bytes. It's a little tiny thing. Then the Gboard people could say, oh, let's activate this for those versions. So that could happen if the right companies are contacted and persuaded. Regarding desktops and so on, I'm hoping that some of the people who sell other operating systems will do the right thing. My experience with this is that when I talked to the Cherokee Nation and got Cherokee user interface in the Cherokee language, Google search in the Cherokee language and Gmail in the Cherokee language, Microsoft was knocking on the door of the Cherokee Nation saying, Windows 8, all got to be in Cherokee. And they did. So a little competition will help here. And somebody has to start. And as I told the conference back there to people being rather excited about it, Google got through the gate first with this. But I'm hoping that we're not the last ones who do a lot of things with this language. We don't sell desktop operating systems. Well, I guess we sell Chromebooks. But it's in our interest to have people using technology in their language and be excited about it. So I think there are things that will happen. It will take time. From what I know about these brothers, they do have patience and persistence. Anything more you want to say about technology and adoption?
Yes, I know his question is a great question. And so, you know, as you saw yourself in Mamou when you were at the conference, there's a lot of excitement for it. And the reason why people were shouting, you know, and singing Google, Google, and your name is because of the impact or the importance of releasing Android, even though people know that they don't have access to it, but the fact that they now know that it's possible and there's a hope that one day they'll get their hands on a device that will have Android 8. So that is an excitement. But the fact also, one thing that Craig mentioned in one of his slides is that the people consider Adlam as it's like a cultural thing now. It's like a part of our culture. It's our own. So it's a huge motivating factor for people to adopt Adlam despite all the challenges that we had. Like, you know, at the beginning, we only wrote this with hands. In order to reproduce books, we had to photocopy them. And that did not stop more people from learning it. And also when we did the keyboard based on the Arabic code points, also there were some challenges, and still we have some challenges, but that still, you know, doesn't stop people from, it keeps growing every year and year, because the reach that it has now, all of it happened before Android, but now it has become even a bigger deal now, you know, since it's available on Google. Now it's being talked a lot. Like after the conference, I was telling Craig, like I would look at my news feed when I go onto my social network, and every day, every time I look there, is all I see is just Adlam. You know, sometimes it's just like, okay, can I just read about something else? Because all the time it was just Adlam for for the month of January, and even part of this February. Part of the month of, so there's a huge interest and motivation for it as a cultural pride thing. So regardless of what happens, people, you know, will be motivated. And like Craig mentioned, so the companies that will support it will get maybe more, I'll say, community love from the people. And so we're hoping, like Craig said, maybe there isn't money to be made right now, but eventually, you know, it's something that companies will consider, because we are officially around 50 million people, and it's a big language. It's one of the 3 languages called transnational languages in West Africa. We have 3 languages: Hausa and Fulani and Mandinka. And, you know, now African countries are exploring ways to promote education in the African languages, because people have recognized that educating in the colonial languages, you know, have huge challenges, because some of the literacy problems that we have, some of the quality of the education that we have, the fact that we're not producing people who can, you know, invent, create things for the community, is partly linked to the fact that we are educating people in a language that they don't really use. So there's an effort, at least the policies being developed to eventually adopt those 3 languages for West Africa. And since Fulani is one of them, and since Adlam is already being used to teach in schools, so eventually, you know, it'll become a big thing that can be monetized for companies, by companies.
So don't hold your breath. Don't hold your breath. We won't have ads necessarily next week in Pulaar.
Yes.
But they'll know that they've arrived when we do. Ibrahim, did you have something to say?
Yeah, like my brother said, even today I have more than 5 calls about phones from Ivory Coast, Guinea, and Nigeria. People, they're going, they talk, I talked to more than 5 people today. They're going every day. We have some people going every day into the markets, checking if they have Android 8.
Yes.
Yeah, every day they're asking us, like the guy from Ivory Coast today, he said there is a way we can use it, this one on Android 7, because I just bought a new phone, but it's Android 7. So, and he said he didn't know that Adlam is not in Android 7. So people are asking for it. Even here in New York, even yesterday, 2 or 3 people was very excited that they bought a new phone just because they used to use iPhone, but they switched to Android because of Adlam.
Any Apple people here?
Yeah, JJ canceled. I don't know if this is why.
So we all should pay attention, because they're making the asks of their companies, and somebody's going to hear this eventually. That's exciting. Any other questions? Well, thank you so much for all these questions. Ibrahim, Abdullah, do you have anything, last parting words for tonight to say to our great audience?
I don't have much to say. You said what you did is really great, and you said all of the great things that needed to be said. So all I can say, if there are people in the audience that can provide support, what we need right now, like you said, is for Adlam to be available everywhere where we can use it. Like I was telling you the other day, you know, I had this document in the Google Docs in Adlam that I was trying to convert into PDF, and that was a challenge. So
I'm making faces. That's what they're laughing at.
Everybody's laughing. No.
Yes.
So I was just
Everybody
hoping,
knows.
you know, we need more support basically, and any type of support to make Adlam available in all the different systems, you know, that would be really helpful, because there is a need. There are people, like my brother said, people are asking about, you know, devices or when they can use it in their devices. I myself even have a friend who called me the other day to tell me that he also upgraded his wife's cell phone so that she can use, so that they can both use Adlam on it. But unfortunately, he bought because he thought it's a new phone. It's a Samsung, I think S8. It's soon going to have Android 8, but it doesn't have it. So he was kind of disappointed, but I told him just to be patient. 1 more month, hopefully the phone will be updated. So there is, people are willing and to even go the extra length to sacrifice for this, because it's something that they
I
own.
know people who selling their cows to buy phones.
Yeah.
So
selling a cow when you're a cattle herder is a big deal.
yeah, it's a big deal for them. Like the guy in Ivory Coast, he told me he sold 2 of his cows to buy a phone.
So yeah, there's a need for it, and if it's there, people will use it, and that's what we're hoping for. And as Craig mentioned, you know, if you see somebody leave Nigeria, drive by road all the way to Guinea for a language conference, it's not because he's being paid, he's getting anything, you know, material out of it. A lot of that is just love for the language and for the writing system. And that's what Adlam has actually over, you know, the other ways of writing Pulaar, you know, because like people say now, some signs have been adopted in the Latin alphabet to write the Fulfulde language, but it's really not being used a lot. It's there are documents available, but basically, since it's perceived as an outside thing, as from the colonizer, so there isn't a lot of love for it. But these people are highly motivated, and if we have the tools, if stuff is available online, and there's a lot of, you know, Africa is a young continent. There are a lot of, like Craig can attest to, a lot of people are young there, so a lot of people are connected. You know, they use cell phones and they're interested in what's going on online. So if we have it, they will use it.
Wonderful. So I think we should let our hardworking Adlam inventors get some sleep. They have lots of work to do and so do you all. But thank you very much for joining tonight, my friends from Portland.
Thank you.
And my friends from the Bay Area. Thank you.
Thank you. Very inspiring. Thanks, guys.